Welcome to the Even Better podcast, where your host, Sinikka Waugh of Your Clear Next Step, brings you exciting content about making communities better by helping people get even better at work.
Joining us, this is Sinikka Waugh, the host of the Even Better podcast. I'm so delighted to have you with us today. And I am thrilled as ever to bring along my friend and our repeat guest, Dawn Ealy. Dawn, thank you so much for joining us today.
Sinikka, it is my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be back for another round of the Even Better podcast.
Any time that I can spend with you, Dawn, just lifts my spirits. And I know that you will be an inspiration to our listeners today, as well as you're talking about 4 ways to develop dazzling communication skills. I just can't wait to dive into this. So before we get started, for those of you who don't know Dawn, one of the things I'm going to invite you to do is to put a pause in this podcast, or wait until after and then go back and listen to the other podcast that Dawn has recorded with us. Dawn is one of our partners. She is the founder of Peak Cadence LLC and strategic partner with us. And through her consulting practice, she helps growing organizations transform chaos into confidence in the way they manage systems, projects, processes, and people. I have been working with Dawn for a couple of years now, and every time, I kid you not, this is legit. Every time that Dawn and I spend even a couple of minutes together, I am inspired and I am enlightened, and I am like, my load gets a little lighter. The things that I'm doing, just my day gets a little bit easier. My step gets a little bit bouncier. My conversation is a little bit enlightened and enlivened, because Dawn has this ability to help bring some sort of order, some sort of comfort, some sort of confidence to the chaos that is my day. And just I'm so inspired by you, Dawn. Thank you so much for all that you do with us and for our customers and for us as a business.
Oh, thank you so much for those kind words. That means a lot coming from you, and I truly appreciate it. And I so enjoy working with you and the entire Your Clear Next Step team, and am grateful to have those opportunities to go out to clients and bring project management and change management and facilitation and all kinds of fun topics to that. It's just my pleasure and my joy. I enjoy it so much, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk more today.
You bet. You bet. So if you are thinking to yourself as a listener and you're thinking, wait, Dawn Ealy, I've heard that name. You may have been in some of her training. She delivers training for us at the state of Iowa, the project management curriculum. And she serves our clients in project management and in change management. And on behalf of Your Clear Next Step, she does this. And then with her own business, she helps people in all kinds of different ways. So let's get into this, because in addition to the project and process and change management stuff, she is a phenomenal communicator and a dazzling communicator, in fact. So let's talk about this 4 ways to develop dazzling communication skills. How did you stumble across this particular title, Dawn? Why are we here?
Well, this was so fun because Sinikka, when I knew we were going to have a conversation, and I really, when we talk about things, the process and project world is really a big part of my world. People are absolutely woven into that too. But I was trying to think about, okay, what new insights, especially after teaching some more classes over the last few years, what could I bring to this conversation? And it honestly just kept coming back to, well, what were the things that helped me be successful in my career? And it just kept coming back to communication. And I had this thought, and I'm like, well, why is that? How is that differentiated? Why is that so different? And it just made me recall a class that I took very, very early on in my career that was called Dazzling Customer Service for IT. So I was an IT professional, and what a way to take a people person and get them to sign up for a class, which was to throw a word like dazzling in there, right? So I don't want to just, if they would have just called it, customer service for IT professionals, I probably still would have signed up, but I got excited about this thing because when I was done, I was going to be able to not just satisfy my customers, but dazzle them. I mean, that I think even goes beyond delight. Like, that is customer dazzling. And so that just sounded really intriguing to me. And so that thought came up when I was preparing for this podcast was, well, what if we could apply that to communication skills? And what if that's the thing, right? Is that project managers and others in the organization, if you're leading initiatives, if you're in charge of initiatives, if you're a manager, a leader, project manager, whatever your role, communication is so, so, so important. We talk about that in our classes. For project managers, for instance, we talk about that's 90% of our jobs. So if it's 90% of our job, what if we were dazzling at that? It's critical and it's hard, and it's not about me is another thing we say about communication. What if we took that concept into play and said, we're going to work on that? It's hard, so we're going to work on it. And we're not just going to work on it, but we are going to be dazzling. And so that's what I took into this conversation was let's take it to the next level and figure out how to be dazzling. And what are the things that I've learned along the way that I think just add that extra sparkle to how I think about communicating with my teams, with my project teams, and those types of things. So that's really what the ideas that sparked the dazzling communication when you're working with your teams.
I love it. I absolutely love it. And as you think about communication, so some of the training you alluded to, training that you've done recently, some of the training that you've been doing with us and for us has been through the Changemakers curriculum. And you alluded to project management and process, and those are two of the classes that you've been teaching. You also helped facilitate the advanced collaboration class, which is heavy into communication, and the facilitation, which is communication, right? So much of this is communication. So let's get into this. 4 ways to help you develop dazzling communication skills. Let's talk about the first one. First one is to anticipate. Let's talk about that.
Oh, this is my favorite one. And there's a couple different ways that I like to think about this. So if I'm thinking about, I'm sitting at my desk and I'm just working, and I have a great pace going on, and I have somebody come to me on my team and they're like, hey, I just needed to let you know that this certain thing I don't think is going to get done. Or I'm not going to be in the office next Wednesday. Or this system is down and that's putting a delay on things. Somebody comes in and you're like, oh, okay. Especially if I have my project manager hat on, I go, bidding, bidding, bidding. I'm on my keyboard. Let me adjust the project plan. Okay, good. We're ready to go. Right. And then I get dive back down into that task that I'm doing. But all that I did was update the plan. So I went into my tool and I updated the plan and I put that information in there and I said, oh my gosh, thank you so much for telling me that. And then I went back to work. What just happened? Now, nobody else knows the impact of that. Nobody else knows what's happening. So I started turning that mindset because there were a couple of times in my career where I found myself doing that. I'm like, oh, well, thanks for that information. I will update the things that affect me. And I didn't think about how it affected other people. So I started getting that skill of anticipation. It was literally this sentence I would put in my head when somebody would come tell me something. The first thing that I got to pop into my head was, who else needs to know this?
Mhm.
I just learned something new. Who do I need to tell? And so that's how I started that pattern and that cadence was I just learned this. Who do I need to tell? And then it also started morphing into who do I need to tell, how quickly, and in what method? Is this a I need to get on the phone? Is this I need to walk and get in front of somebody? What is it that I need to do right now? Is I need to call a team meeting? Or is it just, hey, when we have stand up tomorrow, I can incorporate this because it's not that big of a deal. So it's doing all that processing in the moment and getting outside of yes, the plan needs to be updated. It's really, really important that our artifacts are up to date. But the most important thing that I need to do is something just happened, something just changed. Who do I need to tell? How quickly? And what method am I going to use to do that? So that's the first form of anticipation that I use. Something happened. Who do I need to tell? I also tend to use anticipation a little proactively when I'm thinking about when do people need to hear from me? Like, how frequently are people going to need to hear from me if we've got a big due date coming out or if we have a change coming? And we know we talk about those things too in terms of having communication plans, change plans, and all those things. But it's about kind of anticipating that rhythm and that cadence. Or there's a little bit too of if there's a gap in time between when we've talked to each other. And I start to think it's almost like having a toddler at home. I'm like, it's pretty quiet in the other room. I wonder what's going on right this moment. It's the same thing with your teams, right? Of like, wow, so and so's been pretty quiet and they're not normally quiet. Like, I feel like I need to go check in. So there's anticipation in both ways of, learning something and then anticipating who I need to communicate with, but also just getting a feel for those moments of how far are our events apart from each other? How frequently do I need to talk to somebody? Am I sensing a gap in communication and I need to go fill that? So it's anticipation in those two ways. And I tend to add that in one of our classes. We kind of go through a list of communication skills and what are really important. I always throw anticipation in there too as one of my additions. I think it's a really important skill to have as a leader, as a project manager, and in all those ways.
I love it. And I know we don't have a ton of time for this podcast, but I'm just going to make a quick note here that what you've just done is one of the things that I think is so beautiful. And we try so hard to do this in all of your Clear Next Step trainings that we talk about strategies and tactics. So a strategy is an idea or a concept or a big picture way of doing something. And then the tactic is the in the moment, how do I really do this? And you've just given us the strategy of anticipation as well as the tactic of the very specific who needs to know, how do they need to know, and by when do they need to know it. So you've given us the strategy as well as the tactic, and you've given us two different tactics: the strategy of anticipation, and then two different tactics that we can follow on that. So just really, really love that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Love it, love it, love it. Okay, so let's get on to tip number 2. And for listeners, if you haven't dialed into that other podcast, I'm telling you, you're going to want to listen. The second one is be really, really consistent with your words.
Oh, I am a word person at heart, and so this one makes me very, very happy. And it can kind of feel, if you're a person like me, I am an energetic communicator, and I do like to kind of spice things up and bring energy to the room. I try to do that in other ways so that I can be consistent with my words. So if you think about, we're going to have a meeting every day to keep our team in sync. Are we going to call that a stand up, a morning meeting, a huddle, a daily check-in? And that seems like a weird thing. Like, Dawn, why are you so particular about what you're calling that morning meeting? What difference does it make? Doesn't everybody know that they're going to show up at 9? But that new person who just showed up, don't make me think about that, right? Like, well, she said the morning meeting, but on my calendar it says daily check-in. Is that the same thing, or is she expecting me to be somewhere different? If we all call the morning meeting the same thing, we know when to show up. Or am I calling something a run book, or am I calling something a procedure? Or think about, I've got a new project. Let's say I'm starting a project this fall, and I'm going to know that it's going to launch in the spring. So I'm going to have a spring launch for this project. Well, we decide to get kind of cute in a project meeting, and we're going to call it Robin. Well, half the time we call it Project Robin, and half the time we call it the spring launch. How does anybody outside of our group know which thing we're talking about, right? And so then all of a sudden you've made people think. And there's a book out there that's actually called Don't Make Me Think by Steve Krug. You're nodding your head, I know, about user experience, right? Don't make me think. I think this thing is really important. And for teams and groups working together, I think the terminology is where we can start. Decide what you're going to call something, whether you're using an industry standard terminology or terminology that means to your team, but decide what you're going to call things and then just use that terminology over and over. And I think that's what's really helped me is once I name something, I stick with that name and I call it that name in every meeting notice, in all of my meeting notes, in the way that I speak about it. I use the same terminology over and over because then that's not the important detail that somebody's trying to figure out. They're actually able to listen to the message that's coming behind that because in the way that I title things, call things, explain things, I'm using that terminology over and over and over. In one of our classes, when we were developing our group norms, those shared expectations ahead of the class, a wonderful woman that I had in the class actually talked about, let's have a norm of Granny Smith apples to Granny Smith apples. So not just apples to apples, let's make sure that if we're going to talk apples to apples, that we're talking Granny Smith to Granny Smith. And I thought that was really powerful and it really synced with the way that I think about this thing. Let's be very specific about terminology and then let's be consistent in the way that we use that every time we talk about it. And it takes away so much unnecessary brain power that people would have had to use to figure that thing out. So yes.
Absolutely. Be really, really consistent with your words. When I was working as a contractor years and years ago at a company that handled plants, it was a corn and seed production environment. And the word plant was one of those places where the specificity that was required around the word plant, it meant different things. Sometimes it was the little green thing that would shoot up from the ground. And sometimes it meant the building in which the manufacturing was done. And sometimes it meant the data element in the database that referred to the region. And so that word plant, you had to stop and think about who you were talking to and contextualize what the word plant would mean in that situation. And so that idea of Granny Smith apple to Granny Smith apple, really, really relevant in that situation. I can see how that would be particularly powerful. Don't make me think, right? If we have a term that we can use and take our brain, our mental energy and harness it somewhere else, harness it on the stuff that does matter so that we're not having to mess with it on the stuff that doesn't, that we can all use common language here and free up our brains on the stuff that's where we do need our brains.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You stated that so well. And I love the plant example. I may use that when I talk about Granny Smith apples to Granny Smith apples. The plant example is perfect. That's exactly what I'm talking about. And so being aware of the context, and then also maybe you can't use a different word, but maybe you can also use a descriptor. And or when you're just talking to people, being cognizant of that. And when I just said that word plant, I meant the building that you are in. So yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really cool. All right, so we're on to tip number 3. And if you are just tuning in, we are here with Dawn Ealy, and we're talking about 4 ways to develop dazzling communication skills. We started with anticipate, we moved to be really, really consistent with your words. And now we're on being really, really consistent with your meetings and agendas. Talk to us about that, Dawn.
So I had to play with those words and use them twice because I love consistency. Consistency is one of the things that I do. I design systems, right? And that's why we transform chaos into confidence, is that there's systems in place to help with this, which is why I kind of did this little play on be very, very consistent with your words, be very, very consistent with your meetings and agendas. When you can get your teams into a good cadence of expecting when they're going to meet, whether it's teams or whether it's individuals, I'll talk about this a little bit separately. People just know where and how to expect that they're going to get information, then they don't worry about things. Okay, I know that we have a stand up every day at 9 o'clock, and I know the types of things that we talk about in that meeting. So I know this thing that I'm thinking about at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I can hold on to that. Let me just hold on to that because I know when I get to stand up, that's the right place to do it versus trying to track somebody down or doing something like that. And so that's why I like that I know that I have that 9 a.m. meeting. And by the way, when I get there, I know that we're going to go through these things. And so in my case, when we were running stand-ups, we would also, and I think this is a pretty common practice, where we would have 3 questions that we wanted everybody to answer that day because you're trying to get through quickly. And the particular ones we used on the team that I was working on where this was relatively effective was, what are you working on? Is there anything that you need from anyone in this room that's standing before you right now? And is there anything preventing you from getting your work done today? And so we would try to do those 3 questions in order. Now, sometimes when your group has worked together for a while, you get into some habits and maybe you don't actually ask the 3 questions, and so then you forget about it, and this has come back to bite me before, and so sometimes you need a little bit of a re-energizer. And I had that happen one day where we had to stand up at 9 o'clock, and we went through and everything was grand, and I was like, oh my goodness, this is going to be the best day ever. Everybody's doing really well. There's no blockers, nobody needs anything. I'm actually going to like pick up this project that's been on the back burner for a long time and go work on it. So 9 a.m., leave the stand up, start working on the thing, whistle my way into the break room at noon. I'm going to grab some lunch and go back at it. And I talked to somebody in there who's on the team, and he said, well, I'm not going to be able to get that thing done. And I said, well, no, I don't know that because we were in stand up this morning and you didn't bring that up. And I said, is this a new development since 9? He's like, no, I've known since like yesterday or so that this wasn't going to work. There's no way that I can get this piece done. And I was like, excuse me, why didn't we talk about that in the stand up this morning? He's like, oh, well, I'd kind of just gotten in the habit of just saying, yeah, I'm good. And I forgot to tell you that we had blockers. And I was like, ah. So the very next day we did a little bit of a refresh. And so there's very good things about consistency. You also have to be careful with it, right? So you have to be consistent, but also you might have to throw in something different once in a while, like go backwards around the room or throw in an icebreaker or just have somebody else other than the person who leads the meeting. Hey, can you remind me, just for the sake of everyone in this room, what are the 3 things that we're going to answer? Or could you please preface what you're telling me with the words of the question, kind of like on Jeopardy, just so that we know what we're doing. So you do have to be a little bit careful with consistent, but in my world, like it's a heartbeat. When things are running well, I can kind of feel that in my heart that we've got a good beat, we've got a good pattern. It's like a good music. It's an orchestra conductor and things going on. I start to feel it in my gut when things aren't. I'm like, something's a little off here. But putting some of those consistencies in place, I've used it with leaders as well when I've partnered closely with leaders to set expectations with them. Is we're going to meet once a week. We're going to meet Mondays at 10. And when I come to that meeting, I'm going to have a list of things that I need from you. And we're going to go through that in priority order. If for whatever reason, I actually don't have any burning questions from you, expect that I will give you that time back. And you will get that time back. And I will never meet with you if I don't need to meet with you. And so again, even the consistency of that when I'm working with leaders who are we're talking C-level leaders who are pressed for time, who don't know how those things are going to go. They understand when I get into that room, how we're going to operate together and how that's going to be a consistent pattern. So they're prepped and ready to be ready to answer the questions and provide the things that I need. And they know that I will give them the gift of their time back if I don't use it. So it can be used for teams. It can also be used when working with individuals and executives.
Lovely, lovely. Yet another example of a strategy and a handful of tactical ways to use this. Love it, love it, love it. All right, so we are making our way through 4 ways to develop dazzling 4 ways to develop dazzling communication skills, 4 ways to dazzle as a communicator. Let's look at number 4 then, which would be to be a scribe or get a scribe. I like the offer of 2 different ways on this one. Unpack this a little bit for us, Dawn.
So, scribing is one of the things that I do inherently, and there's a couple reasons for that. Number one is I'm a kinesthetic learner.
Mm.
I really have to have some action associated with what I'm doing. So I'm kinesthetic first, then visual, and then auditory is way behind. So if there's something that you need me to do, telling me only is really not a good way to do it. I will forget. Ask my mom how many times as a child I forgot to empty the dishwasher. It's a million. And so I will forget. And so I developed this habit early on is if I'm in a meeting and I'm not necessarily running the meeting or having to present content, I am taking notes. And I am just taking notes and taking notes and taking notes because that satisfies both the kinesthetic version of my brain and the visual version of my brain because my hands are busy and I'm taking in those things. And what I've found through that is I've developed this ability to then, for example, if I'm meeting with you, Sinikka, and we're talking about some new curriculum we're coming up and you come up with a catchphrase, you might have come up with it just off the top of your head, but you said a certain set of words in a very specific order, and I zoom type those down.
Mhm.
And then voila, the next time that I go to present that, I have it. Right.
Yep.
So the importance of it, especially I think for teams when we're capturing things like that, as well as I'm going back to working with those our leaders, our busy leaders, capture the things that your leaders say because they're so valuable. If you're going to then, if you are the one that has to go away and take and make a strategic plan off of that or present back to your employees what is happening from a corporate level, and here are the things our executives said, take notes and take meetings in that way. And then as a project manager, I get really tactical on that too, in terms of taking the notes in a consistent pattern. It's lovely if you start with a new project team, just grab a template, right? Grab a template for your notes that has the title, the date, the people that were there, and then all the notes. And then one of the projects I was working on, we morphed this a little bit too. So we had action items was a category at the bottom so that you could take the notes as you were going through and then the action items were at the bottom. Well, that's a little bit harder to find, right? So there were 2 things that we started to do as we were doing this, right? Yep, we moved them to the top was one of the things. And then as I was going through as I was taking the notes when we were in the meetings, I would type the word action items in all caps and I would highlight it in yellow and then I would put the person's name next to it. So action item, Sinikka, send Dawn the new curriculum. And so it's in the body of the notes. Then when I got to the end of the meeting, it was really, really easy for me to go find like that line and pull it up to the top and pull it up to the top. And then I could see all the action items for Sinikka, all the action items for Dawn, and having a scribe, like if all we did was record the meeting, can you imagine how difficult it would be to go find that? Now, I think recording meetings is extremely valuable, and I'm not against recording meetings. I think they should be used hand in hand. I think there should be meeting notes, and then especially when the action items, decisions, all those key things that are coming out of that meeting, they either go to a prominent place in the notes. I think they should go to a prominent place in the notes. And then I also believe that there's probably a system. Like we eventually got so busy and so big that we had a database of our action items, right? So then they need to get pulled out of the notes into the action item. But if nobody's writing that stuff down, who is literally going to remember that they had an action item out of that meeting? I don't. I never do. And so having somebody take the notes, if you're talking and doing all the facilitation and you can't, that's why I say either be a scribe. So if you're in the meeting and can just do that and give the group that gift, please do. Or if you are leading and you're not able to do both, then just please ask somebody in the room, like at minimum, please, please, please grab the actions, the decisions, any key phrases that people say in the meeting that we want to make sure we capture. But I think it's really, really important to have that record. And I do it for literally all of my meetings. And I think you've seen this too when we meet. I have a notes document going. And so there's this written component to it too, to give yourself the gift of having those notes handy, whether you do them or somebody else does. So yeah.
I have seen you do this, and when I know that Dawn is in a meeting, I have this sense of relief that at least someone's going to have the notes captured, someone's going to be scribed. But then I also have watched you be really transparent about, I will be happy to take notes for the group on this. I'm taking my own, but I will also take group notes for the group, or I will be the one accountable for the group to take the group notes on this. And so that you're not just taking your own record of I was capturing notes for me, but I'm taking the group notes and being transparent about that so that that accountability is taken as well. Really nice to do that.
Oh, well, thank you. I enjoy
It's
it. I do enjoy it. Yes.
it's downright dazzling.
There you go.
There you go. So, as we are swiftly to the close of our time here together, we have been visiting. If you're just tuning in, you have missed most of the content here. You've got to rewind or whatever you do to go back to the beginning of this, because we've been talking with Dawn Ealy about 4 ways to develop dazzling communication skills, anticipating and being really, really consistent with your words and really, really consistent with your meetings and agendas and being a scribe or getting a scribe. But in all of these are strategies, these are big picture things. And as you listened to Dawn, you would have had a chance to hear very specific, very actionable, go do this now tactics that are woven in here. So I encourage you to stop, rewind, go back and get these. And if you weren't taking notes, go stop and rewind and take notes and apply this, because this is really, really great stuff. Dawn, thank you. Thank you so much for your time today.
You are so welcome. I'm so happy to be here. I always enjoy talking to you.
This has been a joy. So this would not be the Even Better podcast if I didn't get in my last question, though. What's making you even better these days?
There are a couple of things. Number one, I'm working on my schedule and how I schedule my time and getting to be able to take more blocks of time. Yeah, I can take a meeting here and a meeting there, kind of just tears apart my day a little bit. So being a little bit more proactive with my schedule versus reactive. It's the gift of owning your own business to be able to do things like that. You know, we're very used to other organizations where you walk in and that calendar kind of dictates your day. I'm working on switching that mindset. And so my calendar does not dictate my day. I can put my calendar in a place to have really, really great work days. So that fits in with your clear next step so well. Yeah, the other thing that I'm doing is when you think about communication, sometimes we as independent business owners also struggle with how do we describe what it is that we do? And I think with some of the things that I do, especially when I say the 2 words system design, I think that gets some blank stares every once in a while. Well, what do you mean by that? And then it takes me a story, which is fun. It's always fun to tell a story or give an example, right, of here's what I mean by that. And so I'm also working right now on how do I use words and visuals to help people very quickly understand what I mean by system design and how that can help people in their workplace. So more to come on that, but it's just something I'm really excited to get more clarity on that and be a dazzling communicator about what I do.
Love it. I love it. Wonderful. Well, thank you for your time today again. And to all of you who have tuned in today, on behalf of all of us here at Your Clear Next Step, we hope the rest of your day is even better.
Thank you for tuning in today. The Even Better podcast will be back with more content soon. But in the meantime, subscribe to our podcast or check out our website at yourclearnextstep.com for more information. See you next episode.